Crazy Trade Podcast. That's amazing. Welcome to the Crazy Dre Podcast Show, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. It's your main man, aka Crazy Crockett, aka Andrews Podcast. Folks, I'm back. I have to talk about the weekend. I have to talk about President Trump uh, berating President Zelensky of Ukraine about a couple of things. About one, we got to talk about the way that Zelensky likes to dress for the occasion of talking to any type of politician. It just looked bad for him as the United States of America. I think that his demeanor and his style, it may work in Europe and it may be cute or adorable, but I don't think that's going to work for him in America, just because that we have the emphasis of trying to be professional in a professional setting. Uh, I think when he first came to the Oval Office to speak with Donald Trump, you could hear Donald Trump kind of questioning if he needs to change his any of his gear, his wear, and it didn't. It just kind of took President Trump by shock a little bit. So as they go inside to the Oval Office to sit down and chit chat back and forth, we have to always acknowledge that Trump did make a false statement that Zelensky started the war. Clearly, uh, Russia started the war. Putin started the war with Ukraine on February 24 of 2022, just over 3 years ago. Um, we have given Zelensky a lot of money. I thought that President Trump was going to get the job done, and he clearly could not do it. And I think it was a lot of it had to do with Zelensky's demeanor and his way of portraying that he's right and everyone's wrong, and he's doing this great thing for his people or his country. And I just find interesting that when you are speaking to a foreign policies of the United States, uh, I don't know if you should be talking in that form, in that way of disrespectfulness. And I will say that I was surprised that they took the meeting out to the public and in front of the press. I do find it that they did it out front with everybody, and I guess based on some sources out there that said this is what really goes on back there. They will berate you about the way that you dress, um, the way that you act, the way that you disrespected the United States of America. Donald Trump has said that to Zelensky. When I talk about Brian Glenn of the Real American Voice on the website that he belongs to, he's the one that brought up the point of Zelensky's not wearing a suit if he owns a suit. But it's amazing how these meetings go, and I don't think that I personally don't think this really happens. I think that's just kind of a um, more of a policy regarding of of what how much money we paid into this Ukraine Russia war, uh, asking the someone like Zelensky how he plans on paying us back for that, um, asking if there's very unnecessary moment of ceasefire or understanding that this war that you're fighting is probably a lost cause. I feel like there's more bureaucracy, more less yelling and more chit chatting. I think um, that if you would to actually ask any politician that was involved in a little scat or spat between two countries. I don't know that if that is true the way that they would uh, yell at each other, especially the way a guy. I just think it was weird that Brian Glenn, of all people, said something about Zelensky, the way he dressed up or less dressed up, and and I think that when the European countries saw this, they thought that Donald Trump is a big bad bully, and he was berating the snot out of Zelensky. But in reality, you have to look at where are these European countries looking at and what are they acknowledging and accepting? How is it that we have, um, why are we involved in overall? Why are we involved? That's what you should ask yourself. Why should we care about Zelensky and Ukraine and Russia? And why is Europeans so for Zelensky and now we're against Zelensky and now we're against Russia? Well, we're actually not, I'm sorry, we're for Russia and now we're against Zelensky. And the Europeans countries are for Ukraine and are for and against Russia. I'm getting these words mixed up here. I don't know why I'm on a time limit. So I think that we should look at um, that there is a case for Zelensky's 63% of popular vote in Ukraine recently. Donald Trump said there was only 4% of approval of Zelensky in Ukraine, but I think that's a lie. There's also Trump thinks that Zelensky is an illegitimate leader, and he says that the European countries are getting sick of him. And I think they are getting sick of Zelensky. I really think they do. I just think they can't say it. I think that when you are not a strong enough country and you're being beat up that much, even though Russia's soldiers are getting beat up too, but the minerals and the oil and the gas is what you're really fighting for. This is what you really want. This is something that you should understand as Americans, is that we want gas and oil and minerals to make high tech stuff. And Ukraine is on that landmine or that pothole of gold, of minerals and all that stuff. And just for you Americans and Europeans, the European Union and those are the guys who are asking about Zelensky keep fighting against Russia because they too want that minerals and that oil and that gas. So you have to realize that you're not just fighting against Russia because Russia's big bad red country. This is not the Soviet Union of the Cold War. Okay. And and I think that if you allow the minerals to stay in Europe, you if you allow those countries, because those countries they use 21 out of 30 of minerals, oil or gas from that region of that continent. If there are 21 minerals and oils and gas, well, 21 countries that use that, then yes, you're going to be fighting for it. You are going to fight for that. And there is kind of like a race between America and Europeans or Europe. And Russia is kind of pushing Ukraine back and pushing that NATO back and pushing the European Union back. Well, you can't push the European Union back because it's a committee. But the NATO, he's preventing them from going forward because in the last 60 years, NATO promised Russia that they would not keep going forward. That's something that you have to kind of realize. That is something that you should think about, as most people don't realize, is that over time, when NATO keeps pushing the borders and making Ukraine, and you got to remember, Ukraine was offered. Well, Ukraine in June of 22 asked to be involved with the European Union and NATO, and the European Committee gave them the accessibility to start signing up for that course of joining NATO and the European Union. But clearly, the Russians and Putin doesn't want that because again, you're going against that border, and you already made a promise that you weren't going to do that. So, how should America fight for this? How should this war end? That's the question that you should ask yourself. Now, if this wasn't about the minerals and the gas and the oil, because a lot of the European countries still use Russian uh, oil, gas, a lot of them do. And of course, one of our enemies of America is China, and China uses a lot of oil and gas from Russia. But the other European countries, Hungary, uh, Slovakia. I don't even think I pronounced that word right at all, actually. Uh, you know, Hungary, Slovakia, Belgium, Australia, Czech Republic, they all use oil from Russia. Um, Remember in 2021, the Europeans used 90% of oil of Russia and about 40% of gas from Russia. So that's something I looked up myself to to uh, to make my point. Um, the fantasy thing about this whole thing is that a lot of these European countries patted Zelensky on his back after Trump berated uh, um, Zelensky, but that doesn't mean anything to us because I mean, one day this could happen where Russia just takes over Ukraine and we may not fund Ukraine no more. See, that's the concern about this whole thing. I mean, if America decides to not ever use Ukraine's oil and gas and they go somewhere else so we start using our own stuff, it just doesn't matter to us because we're not part of that continent. But it matters to all these European countries because if Ukraine is taken over by Russia, that means Russia could drive up the prices to gas and oil in those European countries. That's the real issue. That's something that we don't talk about. So this has nothing to do with us being bullies to Zelensky. We're trying to help Zelensky. We're trying to tell him, like, look, if you don't want to be taken over in 20 and 30 years from now, after Trump has passed away, Biden will be passing away in the next 10 years. Hopefully not. I mean, the guy was kind of a mental situation as an ex president or was our president. But in 30 years or 10 years or 15 years, I mean, America could just be sitting back and one day Russia could just take Ukraine over and then the European countries will have to renegotiate that contract with Russia. And they may have to pay a buttload of money to Russia for oil and gas if they take over Ukraine. So, in some ways, Zelensky, you got to count your cards, just like what Trump said, or you have to know what you are holding. If you have a two jacks against two queens, you're going to lose. You're just going to lose. I mean, can't explain it to you. But there you go, folks. I mean, I didn't really say much that you didn't know. I mean, I don't know anything that you needed to know. I mean, besides the fact that, if I am right that Russia would take over Ukraine if they don't make a deal, I don't really think it's going to be a World War III. I don't think that's so at all. But I do think that it's just kind of interesting that I'm reading this, and I did some little research. But I mean, there's nothing to really go over. I mean, everyone knows that Russia is just a different place than the European countries. I mean, you guys should really read this book I'm reading. It's called Diplomacy by Henry Kissinger. And then explain that story of why Russia is always on the left side of the field, and how Germany and how France and how England and those guys involved in issues and problems with each other. And if you understand that part of history of the 17th and 18th century, going into the 19th century to 21st century, you'll understand this more of Ukraine and Russia. So count your cards, Zelensky. That's all I mean, I just don't know how you're not going to fold your cards. So there you go. Thank you for listening to Crazy Dre Podcast Show. Uh, I'm going to put this on air sometime sooner or later. Peace, love, follow on rs.com. Follow me on Spotify, YouTube, um, Apple Podcasts, everywhere you can download your podcast. I'm there. Peace, love, and I'm out of here.